The sound you're hearing right now is the wind through 1,000 miles of untouched wilderness. But listen closer. Do you hear that? The silence between the gusts. That's where the real terror lives. Canada's wilderness spans over 3.8 million square miles of some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain on Earth. A landscape so vast that entire communities can vanish without a trace. Where rescue teams search for weeks only to find evidence that raises more questions than answers. What you're about to hear are 10 documented cases from official police reports, search and rescue files, and coroner's records. Stories that have haunted investigators for decades. These aren't campfire tales or urban legends. These are the real accounts of what happens when ordinary people venture into Canada's most isolated regions and encounter something that defies explanation. From the frozen tundra of the Northwest Territories to the dense forests of British Columbia. These wilderness areas hold secrets that have claimed lives, shattered families, and left even the most experienced outdoorsmen questioning everything they thought they knew about the natural world. Tonight, we're taking you into the heart of that darkness, where the line between predator and prey becomes terrifyingly unclear, and where the only witnesses are the trees themselves. Story 1. The Wendigo Hunters of James Bay. Our first story takes us to James Bay, Ontario, a remote region where the Cree have hunted for thousands of years, and where they've always whispered warnings about something else that hunts in return. In October 2019, 5 experienced hunters from Timmins set out for their annual moose hunt along the eastern shore of James Bay. The group included 45-year-old guide, Marcus Whitecrow, a Cree tracker who knew these lands better than anyone. They were expected back on October 22nd, but when they didn't return, family members contacted the Ontario Provincial Police. The search began immediately, and rescue teams found their base camp on October 25th. But what they discovered defied explanation. 4 rifles were arranged in a perfect circle around a cold fire pit. The hunter's gear was untouched with food still sealed in containers. But there were no signs of the men themselves, except for the tracks. According to the official search and rescue report, investigators found footprints leading away from camp that appeared human at first glance. But they were nearly 18 inches long and showed signs of elongated toes, with a stride length suggesting something that stood over 8 feet tall. 3 days later, a trapper found Marcus Whitecrow stumbling along Highway 109, nearly 40 miles from the hunting camp. He was dehydrated, frostbitten, and kept repeating the same phrase, in Cree, Wendigo, I-M-E, the Wendigo is speaking. In his statement to police, Whitecrow claimed that on their second night, something began circling their camp after midnight, describing footsteps that sounded human but wrong, too heavy, too deliberate. When his hunting partner, Tom Bennett, went to investigate, Whitecrow heard him scream, then complete silence. The official report states that Whitecrow was found to be suffering from severe exposure and possible hallucinations, but search teams never found any trace of the other for hunters. And the case remains open, with the OPP filed under missing persons, presumed dead. What makes this case particularly chilling isn't just the disappearance, it's what the Cree elders told investigators when they were consulted. They claimed that area of James Bay has always been cursed, a feeding ground for the Wendigo, a creature that was once human, but transformed by hunger and isolation into something that craves human flesh, and local hunters have avoided that specific region for generations. Marcus Whitecrow never hunted again, moving south to Toronto and refusing to discuss what happened during those 3 missing days, though, according to his family, he still wakes up screaming, claiming he can hear his friends calling his name from the wilderness. The 4 missing hunters were declared legally dead in 2022. Their families still offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of their remains. But as of tonight, the wilderness of James Bay has kept its secrets. Marcus Whitecrow's final words to investigators remain haunting. It's still out there, and it's still hungry. Story 2. The Ice Road. Trucker's last transmission. Our second story comes from the treacherous ice roads of the Northwest Territories, where drivers navigate frozen highways across lakes that could swallow entire trucks if the ice gives way. On February 8th, veteran ice road trucker Dale Morrison was making his final run of the season, hauling mining equipment to a remote diamond operation near Yellowknife. Morrison had driven these routes for over 15 years without incident. But his dispatcher received a frantic radio transmission at 11:47 p.m. that would haunt the trucking company forever. The dashboard camera footage, recovered weeks later when his truck was finally located, shows Morrison driving through what appears to be a normal winter storm, when suddenly, the weather around his vehicle begins behaving impossibly. Snow swirling upward instead of down, his headlights illuminating shapes that seem to move independently of the wind. In the radio transmission, Morrison's voice becomes increasingly panicked as he describes his GPS spinning wildly, showing his location jumping between coordinates, hundreds of miles apart, while his compass needle spins continuously without stopping. The audio captures him saying, "Something's wrong with the road, ... This isn't the road I came in on," followed by the sound of his engine struggling as if climbing a steep incline, though the ice road should have been completely flat. His final transmission, barely audible through static, was chilling. "There are lights under the ice. They're following me. Oh God, they're rising up through the surface." The dashboard footage shows his truck suddenly veering sharply to the left, the camera capturing a brief glimpse of what appears to be massive shadows moving beneath the frozen lake surface, before the feed cuts to black. Search and rescue teams found Morrison's truck 3 weeks later, crashed through the ice in a section of lake that locals claimed had been frozen solid for months, with ice thickness measurements showing it should have easily supported the vehicle's weight. Morrison's body was never recovered, but investigators discovered something that defied explanation. His truck's GPS unit showed a recorded route that formed a perfect spiral pattern, as if he had been driving in circles for hours before the crash, yet his fuel gauge indicated he had used far more diesel than the distance would have required. The trucking company's owner, Jim Radford, told investigators that other drivers had reported strange radio interference and unexplained equipment malfunctions on that same stretch of ice road throughout the season. Local Dean elders, when consulted by police, spoke of ancient warnings about spirits that live beneath the ice, entities that can manipulate the frozen surface and lead travelers astray. But these accounts were dismissed in the official report as folklore. Dale Morrison was officially listed as a victim of a weather-related trucking accident, but his family maintains that the dashboard footage shows evidence of something far more sinister, and they've offered the recordings to paranormal investigators, who claim the audio contains sounds that don't match any known natural phenomena. Story 3. Vanished at Whistler Peak. Our third story takes us to the world-renowned ski slopes of Whistler, British Columbia, where even the most experienced mountain professionals can vanish without explanation. On January 14, 2022, veteran ski patrol member Sarah Chen was conducting her routine early morning sweep of the backcountry boundaries before the mountain opened to the public. Chen had worked Whistler's slopes for 8 years and was known for her meticulous safety protocols, an intimate knowledge of every trail, cliff face, and avalanche zone on the mountain. She radioed her supervisor at 6:15 a.m. to report that she was beginning her descent of the advanced Diamond Bowl area, a steep and challenging section that required expert navigation even for patrol members. When she failed to check in at her scheduled 7:30 a.m. contact, mountain rescue teams immediately began searching her planned route. What rescue teams discovered at 11:45 a.m. sent shockwaves through the tight-knit ski patrol community and baffled investigators. Chun's equipment was found arranged in a perfect, geometric pattern on a flat section of the Diamond Bowl. Her skis crossed in an X formation, her poles planted upright in the snow, forming a precise square around them, and her safety pack opened, with contents arranged in concentric circles radiating outward from the center. The arrangement was so deliberate and symmetrical that investigators initially suspected human involvement. But the snow around the equipment showed only Chen's ski tracks leading to the spot, with no other human traces anywhere in the vicinity. Most disturbing was the fact that Chen's avalanche beacon was found at the center of the arrangement, still functioning and transmitting, though protocol required her to keep it on her person at all times. Search teams expanded their operation to cover over 200 square kilometers of backcountry terrain, using helicopters, search dogs, and thermal imaging equipment, but found no trace of Sarah Chen herself. The mountain's extensive lift surveillance system was reviewed, but cameras showed Chen skiing toward the Diamond Bowl area and then simply disappearing from view. with no footage of her emerging from any of the monitored boundaries. Local indigenous groups from the Squamish Nation, when approached by Chen's family for guidance, spoke of ancient warnings about the mountains, spirit world, and places where the boundaries between realms become thin, particularly during winter storms, when the mountain calls to those who know it too well. The official investigation concluded that Chen likely suffered an equipment malfunction and fell into an unmapped crevasse or tree. But veteran mountain rescue specialists questioned how her gear could have been so precisely arranged if she had suffered an accident. Chen's disappearance became even more mysterious when other ski patrol members reported strange radio transmissions during the following weeks, brief, static-filled signals that seemed to contain fragments of Chen's voice calling for help, though the signals couldn't be traced to any specific location on the mountain. Her colleague Marcus Rodriguez claimed he heard her voice clearly through his radio during a patrol sweep 2 weeks after her disappearance, calling out coordinates that led him to a remote section of glacier where he found fresh ski tracks in the snow, but the tracks ended abruptly at the edge of a cliff face, with no signs of impact below. The resort management banned discussions of these incidents among staff, citing concerns about morale and guest safety. But Chen's family continues to organize search efforts during the off-season months. Sarah Chen was declared missing and presumed dead in January 2024. But her parents maintain a website documenting unexplained sightings and radio transmissions that they believe prove their daughter is still alive somewhere on the mountain. Her final scheduled radio check-in was never completed, but digital analysis of radio frequencies from that morning revealed an anomalous transmission at 7:33 a.m., just 3 minutes past her missed check-in time, containing what audio experts describe as human vocalizations under extreme distress, source unknown. Story 4. The Cabin Creek Recordings. Our fourth story comes from the remote wilderness of northern Manitoba, where a family's dream vacation became a nightmare that was captured entirely on their security cameras. In August 2020, the Patterson family, Robert, Linda, and their 2 teenage children, rented an isolated cabin on Cabin Creek, approximately 150 kilometers northeast of Thompson, for what they planned as a week-long digital detox retreat. The property owner had recently installed a comprehensive security system with 8 cameras positioned around the cabin's perimeter, primarily to monitor for bear activity and vandalism during the off-season. What those cameras recorded over 5 terrifying nights would become some of the most disturbing surveillance footage ever reviewed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The first 3 nights passed without incident, but on Thursday, August 13th, the motion-activated cameras began detecting movement in the surrounding forest at exactly 2:17 a.m. The footage shows dark figures moving between the trees in a coordinated pattern, circling the cabin at a distance of approximately 50 meters, but the shapes are too obscured by shadows and vegetation to identify clearly. What made the recordings particularly unsettling was the methodical nature of the movement. The figures appeared to be studying the cabin, pausing at windows and doors before continuing their circuit. By the 4th night, the figures had moved closer, and thermal imaging revealed that whatever was circling the cabin registered no heat signature, despite moving through snow that should have left clear tracks. The family reported hearing scratching sounds on the roof and walls, but when Robert Patterson checked the exterior cameras in real time, the screens showed only empty forest, even though the scratching continued. The situation escalated dramatically on their final night when the cameras captured multiple figures standing motionless around the cabin's perimeter, positioned at every window and door simultaneously. The timestamp shows this occurred at 3:33 a.m., lasting for exactly 33 minutes before the figures simply vanished between camera frames. During this time, the family's cell phones and radio equipment experienced complete failure, and their vehicle's engine wouldn't start, despite functioning normally the previous day. Linda Patterson's journal, recovered later, describes feeling watched by invisible eyes and experiencing shared nightmares, where all 4 family members dreamed of being pulled into the forest by shadowy hands. The most chilling aspect of the recordings was audio analysis that revealed whispered conversations in an unknown language occurring just outside the camera's detection range, with voice pattern analysis suggesting at least 12 distinct speakers, though only 4 to 6 figures were ever visible on camera. The Patterson family cut their vacation short and fled the cabin at dawn on August 18th, leaving most of their belongings behind. When they reported the incident to local RCMP, officers initially dismissed their claims as imagination or wildlife encounters until they reviewed the security footage. Constable James Erickson, who investigated the case, stated in his official report that the recordings showed unexplained phenomena that warrant further investigation by specialized units. But the case was quietly transferred to federal authorities and classified. The cabin's owner, Harold Steinberg, revealed that 3 previous rental families had reported similar experiences and demanded immediate departure. But he had assumed they were attempting to avoid payment. Local Cree guides from the nearby Nissachusetts First Nation told investigators that the area around Cabin Creek had been considered spiritually dangerous for generations, with traditional stories warning of shadow people who imitate human behavior while hunting for souls to claim. The Patterson family has never returned to Manitoba and refuses to discuss the incident publicly. But copies of the security footage have circulated among paranormal investigators, who claim the recordings show evidence of interdimensional entities. Harold Steinberg removed the cabin from rental listings permanently and eventually abandoned the property entirely, stating that maintenance workers reported hearing voices and seeing figures even during daylight hours, making the location impossible to manage safely. Story 5. Miners of Ghost. River. Our 5th story takes us deep beneath the Earth's surface to the abandoned Ghost River mine in northern British Columbia, where a routine inspection turned into a descent into living hell. On September 3, 2018, a 4-man safety inspection team from Provincial Mine Safety descended into the shuttered copper mine to assess structural integrity before final closure proceedings. The team consisted of veteran inspector Carl Hendricks, geological engineer Maria Santos, safety specialist Tom Bradley, and mine foreman Jake Morrison, who had worked the Ghost River operation for over 20 years before its closure in 2016. The inspection was expected to take 6 hours, with regular radio check-ins every 2 hours. But at 2:47 p.m., approximately 4 hours into their descent, a catastrophic cave-in trapped the team 800 feet underground in a section of tunnel that had been considered structurally sound. Emergency rescue operations began immediately, but the unstable geology made traditional extraction methods impossible, forcing rescuers to dig an entirely new access shaft that would take weeks to complete. During this time, the trapped miners maintained sporadic radio contact, reporting adequate air supply and no serious injuries, but their transmissions gradually became increasingly disturbing. On the 3rd day, Carl Hendricks reported hearing other voices in the tunnels with them, describing conversations and footsteps echoing from deeper sections of the mine that had been sealed off for decades. Maria Santos corroborated these reports, claiming she could see light sources moving in blocked passages that should have been completely inaccessible. And the team began finding fresh food containers and water bottles in areas where no supplies should have existed. Tom Bradley's voice logs, recovered after the rescue, describe encounters with other miners who appeared to be working abandoned sections of the tunnel, wearing outdated safety equipment and speaking in languages the team couldn't identify. The most chilling aspect of their entrapment emerged during week 2, when the survivors reported that these mysterious other miners were attempting to lead them deeper into unexplored sections of the mine, claiming there were easier ways out, through passages that weren't on any official mine survey. Jake Morrison, despite his decades of experience in the facility, became convinced that the mine's layout had somehow changed during their imprisonment, with new tunnels appearing overnight and familiar landmarks disappearing entirely. The team's battery-powered lights began revealing carved symbols on tunnel walls that weren't present in any previous mining documentation, intricate designs that appeared freshly etched despite the mine's years of abandonment. Radio transmissions from day 12 onward captured the team arguing among themselves about whether to follow these phantom miners deeper underground, with Carl Hendricks becoming increasingly agitated and insisting that the others were their only hope for survival. After 18 days underground, rescuers finally broke through to reach the trapped inspection team, but they found only 3 survivors in a state of severe psychological distress. Jake Morrison was discovered missing, with his equipment found at the entrance to a previously unknown tunnel that extended far beyond the mine's documented boundaries. Though geological surveys showed solid rock should have existed in that location, The three survivors, Hendricks, Santos, and Bradley, all provided consistent accounts of Morrison voluntarily following the mysterious miners into the depths on their final night, claiming he believed they were leading him to the real way out and promising to return with help. Extensive searches of the expanded tunnel system revealed no trace of Morrison or the additional miners the survivors described. But investigators found evidence of recent excavation work and tool marks that suggested human activity within the sealed sections of the mine. The survivors required months of psychological treatment, and all three men retired from mining work immediately, with each reporting recurring nightmares about voices calling them back underground. The Ghost River mine was permanently sealed with concrete in early 2019. But local residents report hearing machinery sounds and seeing lights deep underground on quiet nights, leading some to believe that whatever workforce exists in those tunnels continues their mysterious operations. Jake Morrison remains officially listed as missing and presumed dead, though his wife claims she occasionally receives brief, static-filled phone calls where she can hear what sounds like mining equipment, and her husband's voice saying he's almost found the way back to the surface. Story 6. The Mackenzie River Incident. Our sixth story takes us to the vast waterways of the Northwest Territories, where a routine charter flight became an encounter with forces that defied all meteorological understanding. On July 19, 2023, experienced bush pilot Captain Rebecca "Becca" Thornfield was flying a Cessna 206 floatplane along the Mackenzie River, transporting supplies to a remote geological survey camp near Fort Good Hope. Thornfield had logged over 8,000 flight hours in northern Canada's challenging conditions and was renowned for her ability to navigate through severe weather that would ground less experienced pilots. At 3:22 p.m., while flying at 2,500 feet altitude, in clear skies with unlimited visibility, Thornfield radioed Yellowknife Flight Service with a routine position report, indicating normal flight conditions and an estimated arrival time of 4:15 p.m. at the survey camp's designated water landing site. 18 minutes later, at 3:40 p.m., Thornfield's voice crackled through emergency frequencies in a transmission that would become one of the most analyzed distress calls in Canadian aviation history. Her normally calm, professional demeanor had transformed into barely controlled panic as she reported encountering impossible weather patterns that seemed to be forming directly around her aircraft. According to the recorded transmission, Thornfield described walls of storm clouds materializing from clear air, creating a circular barrier that prevented her from changing course in any direction, while her instruments showed conflicting readings that suggested she was simultaneously climbing and descending at impossible rates. Most disturbing was her report of geometric lightning, electrical discharges that formed perfect straight lines and right angles, rather than the chaotic branching patterns of natural lightning, with each flash seeming to probe her aircraft, like searchlights, scanning for something specific. Thornfield's final coherent transmission came at 3:47 p.m., when she reported that her compass was spinning wildly while her GPS showed her location, jumping between coordinates across 3 different provinces. Despite her visual confirmation that she remained over the Mackenzie River, her voice, now barely recognizable due to static interference and what audio analysts later described as extreme psychological distress, claimed that the storm clouds were exhibiting intelligent behavior, forming tunnels and passages that seemed designed to guide her aircraft toward the river below. She described seeing structures within the cloud formations that resembled buildings or machinery, and reported that her radio was picking up transmissions in unknown languages that seemed to be giving her landing instructions for coordinates that didn't exist on any chart. The final words recorded were Thornfield screaming, "It's not weather. It's not natural, ... They're bringing me down to the water. Tell my family I tried to fight it." Search and rescue operations began immediately, with multiple aircraft and ground teams scouring over 400 square kilometers of the Mackenzie River Valley. But no trace of Thornfield or her aircraft was found during the initial search period. 3 days later, Indigenous hunters from the Gwich'in First Nation discovered the wreckage of her Cessna floating in a remote Oxbow Lake, approximately 60 kilometers from her last reported position. But the crash site raised more questions than answers. The aircraft appeared to have made a controlled water landing rather than crashing, with minimal structural damage and no signs of fire or explosion. Yet Thornfield's body was never recovered from the intact cockpit. More puzzling was the discovery that her flight logbook contained detailed entries describing landmarks and navigation points that don't exist in the Mackenzie River region. Written in Thornfield's handwriting, but describing terrain features that matched no known geography. The plane's black box revealed that during the final 7 minutes of flight, the aircraft had somehow traveled over 200 kilometers while maintaining level flight, a distance impossible to cover in that time frame, given the Cessna's maximum speed. Weather stations throughout the Northwest Territories reported completely clear conditions on July 19th, with no storm activity recorded anywhere along Thornfield's flight path. Yet the aircraft's exterior showed evidence of severe hail damage and electrical burns consistent with multiple lightning strikes. Captain Rebecca Thornfield remains listed as missing and presumed dead, but her case has attracted the attention of meteorologists worldwide, who cannot explain the weather phenomena described in her final transmissions. And several pilots have reported similar experiences of impossible weather while flying over the same section of the Mackenzie River, leading Transport Canada to issue unofficial advisories warning aviators to avoid the area during certain atmospheric conditions that remain scientifically unexplained. Story 7. Grizzly Lake Massacre. Our 7th story takes us to the remote wilderness camp of Grizzly Lake in northern Alberta, where what appeared to be a tragic bear attack revealed evidence of something far more sinister and calculating. In late June 2021, Camp Wildwood, a summer retreat for troubled teenagers run by the Provincial Social Services, sent 12 campers and 4 counselors to their annual wilderness therapy program at Grizzly Lake, located 200 kilometers northwest of Fort McMurray. The camp had operated successfully for over 15 years without major incidents, focusing on outdoor survival skills and group therapy sessions, designed to help at-risk youth develop confidence and social bonds. Lead counselor Michael Torres, a former park ranger with extensive wilderness experience, had personally scouted the location months earlier and found no signs of dangerous wildlife activity in the immediate area. On the morning of June 28th, when the scheduled radio check-in failed to occur, camp administrators contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to conduct a wellness check. Officers arriving at the lakeside campsite discovered a scene of carnage that initially appeared to be the result of a grizzly bear attack. Tents were shredded, camping equipment scattered throughout the forest, and evidence of a violent struggle was visible across the entire campsite. However, as investigators examined the scene more carefully, disturbing inconsistencies began to emerge that suggested human intelligence rather than animal behavior. The 4 counselors' bodies were found, arranged in a precise square formation around the extinguished campfire, each positioned exactly 12 feet from the fire pit and facing inward, with their personal belongings placed in neat piles beside each body, despite the apparent chaos of a bear attack. More troubling was the discovery that the 12 teenage campers were missing entirely, with no bodies, blood trails, or signs of additional violence beyond the counselors' deaths. Yet their personal items, backpacks, clothing, and electronic devices were found hanging from tree branches in a methodical pattern, forming a perfect circle around the campsite perimeter. Forensic analysis revealed that while the counselors had died from injuries consistent with large claws and teeth, the precision of the wounds and the strategic targeting of vital organs suggested a level of anatomical knowledge that wild animals do not possess. Additionally, investigators found human footprints throughout the campsite that were too large to belong to any of the missing campers or deceased counselors, with measurements indicating individuals standing over 7 feet tall, yet DNA analysis of blood samples found no match to any known human or animal profiles in forensic databases. The search for the missing teenagers expanded to cover over 800 square kilometers of wilderness, involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and indigenous guides from local First Nations communities, but no trace of the 12 campers was ever discovered. Witnesses from the nearby Mikisu Cree First Nation reported seeing unusual lights moving through the forest for several nights following the discovery, and elders spoke of ancient warnings about forest guardians who protect the wilderness by claiming those who venture too deep into sacred territories. Most disturbing was the testimony of surviving counselor Lisa Martinez, who had been found unconscious but alive in a tent positioned outside the main campsite. Martinez claimed she remembered hearing the teenagers screaming in unison, not in terror, but as if responding to commands, followed by the sounds of them walking in formation deeper into the forest while the counselors were being attacked. Her account described hearing what sounded like human voices giving instructions in a language she couldn't identify, and seeing shadowy figures that moved upright like humans but were too tall and moved with unnatural coordination. The official investigation concluded that a rogue grizzly bear had attacked the camp, with the missing teenagers presumed dead and their bodies carried away or consumed. But the case was quietly reclassified when additional evidence suggested organized human involvement. The families of the missing campers have maintained their own search efforts for over 3 years, and several have reported receiving anonymous phone calls containing the sounds of their children's voices singing traditional camp songs, though audio analysis has been unable to determine the source or authenticity of these recordings. Grizzly Lake has been permanently closed to camping and recreational activities, with the area now monitored by motion-activated cameras that frequently capture unexplained movement and figures that appear human in shape but exhibit behaviors that suggest something far more dangerous than any known wildlife in the region. Story 8. The Aurora Borealis Watchers. Our 8th story takes us to the remote research station at Resolute Bay, Nunavut, where a team of atmospheric scientists made contact with something beyond our understanding while studying the northern lights. In March 2019, the Aurora Research Collective deployed a 5-person team to establish a temporary observation post on Cornwallis Island, one of the most northern inhabited locations in Canada, to conduct groundbreaking research on the electromagnetic properties of Aurora Borealis during the peak of solar maximum activity. The team consisted of lead researcher Dr. Elena Vasquez, atmospheric physicist Dr. James Chen, electromagnetic specialist Sarah Winters, graduate student Marcus Reed, and technical coordinator Anna Kowalski, all equipped with cutting-edge magnetometer arrays and high-definition cameras designed to capture aurora activity at unprecedented resolution and detail. For the first 2 weeks of their 3-month deployment, the team recorded remarkable aurora displays and gathered data that would later be described as revolutionary in understanding the interaction between solar wind and Earth's magnetosphere. However, on March 18th, during an exceptionally intense geomagnetic storm, the team began reporting anomalous readings that defied conventional atmospheric physics. Dr. Vasquez's research logs, recovered months later, describe aurora formations that responded directly to the team's radio transmissions, with the lights appearing to pulse and shift patterns in real-time correlation with their communications equipment. More disturbing was their discovery that when they transmitted specific radio frequencies, the aurora would form geometric shapes and patterns that seemed deliberately crafted, including perfect spirals, triangular formations, and intricate mandala designs that persisted for hours rather than the typical seconds of natural aurora activity. The situation escalated dramatically during their 5th week, when the team's final video transmission, sent via satellite link to their base station in Yellowknife, showed the aurora descending from the upper atmosphere to ground level, surrounding their research station in a dome of shifting green and blue light that pulsed in rhythm with what Dr. Chen described as a heartbeat frequency. The video captures the team's growing excitement as they realize they may have made first contact with an intelligence that communicates through electromagnetic manipulation of atmospheric particles, but their enthusiasm quickly turns to terror as they begin experiencing shared visions and hearing synchronized voices, speaking in harmonious tones that seem to originate from within the aurora itself. Sarah Winters can be heard on the recording describing feeling invited to step outside into the lights, while Marcus Reed reports that the aurora is showing them images of other worlds and civilizations, projected directly into their minds through electromagnetic stimulation of their neural pathways. The final transmission from the Aurora Research Collective team came at 11:47 p.m. on March 25th, consisting of a 47-second video showing all 5 researchers standing outside their station in sub-zero temperatures without protective gear, staring upward at the aurora with expressions of rapture as the lights descended to envelop them completely. Dr. Vasquez's voice can be heard saying, "We understand now. It's not just atmospheric phenomenon. It's a doorway. We're going to see what's on the other side before the transmission cuts to static." Search and rescue teams reached the research station 6 days later, finding all equipment functioning normally and detailed research logs documenting their discoveries, but no trace of the 5 scientists. Most mysteriously, the station's external cameras continued recording for weeks after the team's disappearance, capturing aurora displays that occurred nightly, regardless of solar activity levels, with the lights consistently forming patterns that spelled out the researchers' names in multiple Earth languages, as well as symbols that linguistic experts have been unable to decode. The Aurora Research Collective officially classified the incident as a tragic accident caused by exposure and disorientation during extreme weather conditions. But electromagnetic readings from the site continued to register impossible energy, signatures that suggest ongoing interaction between terrestrial technology and unknown atmospheric intelligences. Local Inuit elders from Resolute Bay have reported that the area now experiences aurora activity year-round, even during summer months, when such phenomena should be impossible. And several residents claim to have seen the missing researchers walking within the lights on clear nights, appearing to beckon others to join them in their eternal dance with the northern sky. The research station remains abandoned but operational, with its automated systems still transmitting data that shows the aurora continues to respond to human technology, leading some scientists to theorize that Dr. Vasquez and her team may have achieved a form of consciousness merger with the electromagnetic entities they were studying, becoming permanent guardians of the threshold between our world and whatever realm exists within the aurora borealis itself.